may have it.
George
Yeah, you may have it.
We were kids, and that they could all relate to that. Oh, just whatever comes up. It was just, you know, just kind of whatever. No, don't word it. No, that's all right. Don't even bother wording it like this. Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I can do the intro. I'll probably forget what I want to say, but I can remember to try. And if you notice that I forgot anything, let them know. Thought we'd get started with our question and answer period. I'll kind of set the stage for you a little bit. We're going to ask questions of Pete and Ethel Wilson's 3 remaining children. I call them the Wilson kids. And Pete and Ethel Wilson lived on Saddle Creek in the Hells Canyon of the Snake River, and that's on the Oregon side. From the mid-19-teens to mid to late 1930s, apparently 38, okay. And Pete and Ethel had 8 children. There was Jim, Alan, Marjorie, Violet, Chuck, the twins, Dan and Don, and last but not least, Catherine, or we call her Kappy. And so we're going to be talking to Violet today, and then Chuck, and then Kappy. And then any questions you have for them, if you wouldn't mind standing up and talking real loud so we can all hear you. Mike's videotaping this, and I'm putting it on a little cassette, and hope to transcribe it this winter, and you can all have a copy of it if you want to. I thought after reading the button on Violet's blouse that this might be a good theme for what we're doing, and it says, "I survived damn near everything." And I think they can all tell their story individually of how they survived their lives in Hells Canyon as young people. So we'll start off with Aunt Violet and take it from there.
There's several pieces of paper that I put out on the tables. If you think of questions that you'd like to ask, we have a real treasure in living history here as far as what life was like in the canyon. I don't know, probably a good part of you haven't been there, but this is a real treat that we have. So I'm going to kind of just jump around on some of these initially, and I'm going to sit down so I'm not in the way. What do you remember about your grandmother, Eliza Marks Wilson Jensen?
She was the only person that I knew that up until she died, she wore the long dress, long skirt, gathered skirt clear to the floor, and what was called a midi blouse, and always had a cameo brooch up here. Yeah. And the hottest day of summer, I was seeing her out pulling in the garden with that long skirt and then an apron over it. And of course, if company came, you always put on a clean apron. And Grandma had beautiful red, naturally curly, real curly hair.
Was it long?
Every morning, yes. Every morning she got up extra early. If any of us kids were there, made sure anyone there, she got up early, built the kitchen fire, heated the big wash pan of water, and washed her hair because she couldn't comb it, it would be so curly. And she'd wash it and then stand in front of the mirror, the sink, the old sink, and comb my hair. One morning I woke up and I sneaked downstairs and looked through the china cabinet window from the front room to the kitchen and watched her. And she would start combing that out and she'd pull it real tight and have this bun up here on top of her head and just twist that hair and pull it as tight till I don't think she could blink her eye and pin it. And the ends of that was all still pretty red, as old as she was, and yet by the afternoon the hair around here was snow white, and it would pull loose as it kinked up, you know, until it would just be a curly halos around here. And I told her once, I said, Grandma, you must be kind of an angel because that looks just like a halo. And she always said, dang it. And she'd say, dang it, honey, there's nothing like an angel with me. And she always had sugar cookies, and no matter when, in her pantry, whenever you got here, we got either a glass of cold milk or a cold buttermilk, which was wonderful, and a big sugar cookie that was so big around. And I loved her for that.
And she lived in Naha?
At the mouth of Freeze-Out Creek,
Okay.
and that's where we came down Freeze-Out to the Marks place right below her, who were her, she was a Marks, and they were her brothers. And that's where our storehouse was for our freight and mail. And she just lived up from them between them and the Freeze-Out, the mouth that was there. And we stayed with Grandma whenever we got to. And she also, when they were first married and lived down in Arizona, they lived in that part near the Tonto Basin and in a covered wagon, she told me. And she had a whole stack of Zane Grey's novels. And every one of them had his name written. He had written and mailed them to her. And he was a young man traveling through there, and he told me he was a writer, and could he work for his board? And he slept in a blanket out on the ground. And he'd go around the different ranches and question them. And to the last man, that book was, Grandma knew the two rangers that was based on. And she'd let me read those books, but I couldn't take them home. I would read part of a book, but I had to wait till the next time I came out, because he had signed them and sent them to her, and she said because he thought they were so kind to him. And after, when she died, when she fell and broke her hip, came out to Enterprise, Mother took care of her until she died. When they went back down there, someone had stolen that whole set of Zane Grey books. And to this day, I hope they never got a cent over that.
So you mentioned that she used to wash her hair, so what would you use for shampoo?
Soap, bar soap, homemade bar soap.
Homemade bar soap. So that
Lye
was...
soap, just like we did over on Snake River there. She made her own. You saved your lard drippings until you got enough for the recipe for 1 can of lye, and then you made your homemade soap, and that lasted quite a while. It was a lot like the Felsnaptha soap that you can still buy. No one had lice or anything like that as long as you used that lye soap for shampoo.
So if you were going to pack up and head out, I suppose you went to Enterprise for supplies, or where would you normally go?
When we had to, we'd send out to Enterprise, and they'd send it down on the freight
On the boat?
to that storehouse.
Oh, okay,
on the Mnoho.
okay.
And we'd come out with packed horses and get it there.
So from the time you went out the door to pack up, to go to Naha to get supplies, how long would that take?
Well, depending on the weather, partly, because you had to go out over freeze-out saddle and down. We figured a good 3.5 hours. And the first time the folks said I was old enough to go out there by myself, I knew there was a bear behind every big pine tree and everything else. It was kind of a spooky ride to suddenly be alone going that far.
How old were you?
I think that I was 12 years old at the time.
You went out by yourself for supplies? Goodness sakes.
I'd gone with
Did you have a
Marjorie
gun?
and with Alan and Jimmy, different times, you know, but by then they were older and I was old enough to do these things, you know, so that's the way.
At 12 years old, when you started going by yourself, were you allowed to pack a gun?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
and I could shoot pretty good then.
I bet.
We had 22 rifle that always packed,
Mhm.
and
Did you ever see a bear or a cougar when you did that?
once when Charlie and I went out together and we were coming back around what was called the Dangers, halfway up around our upper place that summer, we came out of one creek around, out toward another. Here come a bear just barreling down the side, and we just knew he was after us, and boy, we galloped our horses. They were getting tired out by then because we'd ridden out and back that day. And we just knew that bear was going to get us, you know. And we beat him, and that's like some people try to beat a train, you know. Well, we beat the bear, and we got way past him before he got down.
You wanted
to
him
the
behind
train.
you.
Huh?
You wanted him behind you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Did you ever have bears or cougars come to the Saddle Creek house in a threatening manner at all?
No, right near there. They would come down. There was an orchard up the creek, one of the orchards, about 3/4 of a mile, and it had an upper garden there. And around the irrigation ditch that came around to the alfalfa field had fruit trees all along. And there were bears come down there to get the fruit. And then that's where we kept the milk cows, calves in that corral. And one morning, Marjorie and I went up to milk the cows, and our dog, the cow dog, was with us and acted so funny, and we saw something just going over the ridge ahead of us, and the dog was really after it, and we called it back, and I thought at first it was a coyote, and I told Dad how its tail was shaped, you know. He said that was a cougar. And he said probably after one of the milk house calves.
Well, speaking of dogs, what kind of dogs normally did you have in there?
Shepherd type, and evidently even had this one female dog that Dad kept to raise pups for cow dogs, because they get killed. Every year we lose a good cow dog, or either a mule or somehow they get killed. And she looked a lot like a blue heeler, and had a blue tone to her with a white shepherd trim. And so they were crossbred dogs. And the cow dogs, we kids weren't supposed to play with,
Oh, really?
because they were working animals. And they were like having another cowboy along with the cattle, because Dad trained them so well that I have seen him send the cow dog, and I've done that too with old Kappy that he gave to me, clear across the canyon, and you made motions for them to go up or over, and they would get some cattle and bring them clear down, cross that creek and up to us, at least a mile away. And that saved a lot of riding. So they were very important in the canyon.
How were you able to train them?
Dad always took a half-grown pup with the good cow dog. And it followed wherever that dog went and learned. just like parents teaching children, you know. And by watching Dad and his commands, that's the way they trained them.
What would you feed them?
Well, the venison that we couldn't hardly trim off of the bones, and of course we ate deer the year round and sturgeon. And once in a great while we had some beef if one rolled and Dad saw it and could butcher it and save it. Quite a few times we even wished amongst ourselves that one would roll so we could have some beef. We were tired of venison.
Okay. So did the dogs sleep inside or outside?
Outside always. Dad didn't want them in the house. And even at the cow camp, when it was mealtime, those dogs knew to go lay back and lay down. They were not to stand around camp and watch us eat, because they knew they'd get fed later. He didn't like having dogs standing, laying there, smacking their lips over our food.
Did you ever have trouble with them taking off, like chasing skunks or raccoons or anything? Or?
Once in a great while around the rinks there at night, skunks and raccoons with Mom's chickens. Chickens were hard to keep because, especially when it was my job, forgot to shut the chicken house door at night. And the dogs would jump them maybe. And you hated it if they jumped a skunk.
Well, you can't talk about Hell's Canyon without talking about snakes. You know, it was just, it's their habitat. You know, it's their habitat. So, how did you avoid them? Did you have a lot of them at the house? Did you,
From the time we were little kids and would ask one of the folks, can we go play here or there? It was yes, probably. But watch out for the river and rattlers. That was the two things that always ended with. And that was the two big dangers. And Dad always said, a rattler is never dead unless his head is clear off of his body. And I had a good object lesson of that one time.
did you?
But, and there was nothing during the summer, spring and summer, when we were out riding to kill 6 or 7 snakes in one day. And there was always people that asked me, how'd you kill them? I said, well, there's always rocks. You know, Dad's second crop was rocks.
Yeah.
And or a stick, a limb, and
So none of you kids ever got bit? Did any
No.
of your animals get bit?
Charlie got bit once out on the Naha. When he went out there to help hay, he and Bert Miller. No, Charlie didn't get bit. Bert Miller got bit.
Okay.
He was the ranger's son, and they were good friends. But he and Bert would catch rattlers in the field and put them in a gunny sack, and then at the bunkhouse at night of an evening, they'd turn them loose and let them crawl away and grab them by the tail and jerk them back. And that's how Bert got. One was crawling away, and Bert grabbed another one, and that one struck him on the thumb.
So was he okay?
Yeah.
What was your object lesson about the snake?
I was wrangling the horses up on the pasture up on the north hillside in the spring, and the cheatgrass was about so high, but it was still some nights with frost. I went up past the corrals and up on the north hillside and as I started up in this flat, there were rocks and boulders around, but this little short. And the sun hadn't come up yet. And so that cheatgrass was frosty there. I looked down, and on a little flat rock lay this little rattler about this long, dead. And I thought, that's a cute little one, just had one button. I'm going to tie that on the saddle, take it down, and show it to the twins and Kappy, you know. And so I did. And soon after, got the horses down and drove one down to the house and tied up my horse at the at the instant post out front and went in to eat my late breakfast. I was hungry. And by then the sun had come down, I guess you'd call it. And Dad was asking me where I'd found the horses and all, and I said, "Oh, Daddy, I found the little dead rattler up there by the corrals." "Well, you did? What'd you do with it?" I said, "I brought it down to show the kids. It's tied on my saddle out there." And by then he was out of his chair, and he said, "Let's go see that dead rattler." When we went out there, the horse tied up, and he was looking around like this, and that little rattler, I tied him right in the middle on my back saddle strings, and he was going like this back and forth. Luckily, the blanket protected the horse, but the horse was pretty worried. I was just amazed. I just knew he was dead, you know. And Dad said, "Now, what did I tell you?" I said, "A rattler's never dead unless his head is off." Well, he said, "That's a good example right there." He said, "You're just lucky that the sun didn't come out sooner. And you got home in time, because it would have struck my leg." And so I didn't forget after that.
I bet so.
And then he explained they're just like geese, that when it's cold, they're cold-blooded, and they act dead.
Was that your closest call with the rattlesnake?
Yes.
How about spiders? I have to ask. Mom was always deathly afraid of spiders.
I-
Why would that be, do you know?
Well, we had black widow spiders almost before. The folks knew that they were poisonous.
Uh-huh.
And they didn't like spiders in the cellar or anywhere. And for some reason, this day, I don't want a spider around me anywhere.
Okay.
And so they would tell us, just leave it, don't bother spiders, and black ones and gray, kind of spotted ones especially, that look a little fuzzy,
Oh.
are very dangerous, so we didn't get near them. And of course, there wasn't near as much brushy stuff as there is around now, because the cattle kept some of that fed back, and so there weren't spiders all over like there is down there in the canyon
Oh, there
now.
wasn't. How about ticks? Did you have problems with ticks?
In the springtime. That's why Dad didn't want us to kill magpies, because in those days they didn't have spray or dust or anything for the cattle. And if a cow was wintered real thin, and it was a good spring with lots of great green grass, and the ticks hatched out, they would just cover cows, and they would literally make them so weak that they just lay down, and that was it. And magpies, about the time the cows were calving, when I was old enough to watch the cows for Dad to see if any were in trouble and needed his help, you would see as much as 6 or 8 magpies on one cow, all up and down their back picking ticks. And then the cow would lay down, they'd pick them off of their stomach and legs. And Dad said those were his friends.
So you weren't allowed to shoot those?
We weren't supposed to. Chuck and I, a few times in the thorn brush, he'd usually do the climb out of the thorn tree and see if we could get us a little magpie. And we'd always been told that you split their tongue, that you could teach them to talk, and that's what we wanted to do.
We were talking about going out for supplies out to Inaha, or how many times a year would you have to do that?
Our main year supply was ordered in the fall after the beef were sold. And the folks kept a list of the supplies they would need for the year. Some years, if they had left over, they didn't order quite as much of one thing. And they sent it out to about 3 different stores in Joseph and Enterprise, and they bid on, and that's the way all the rangers did. They bid on what they could furnish all that for. And then whoever and usually Berlin Grocery and Enterprise there in my days got our bid most of the time. and did a good job, and then they ship it all down to that warehouse there at my great, at the Marx's. And then it would take over a week of every day with pack string,
Really?
taking out, going out there and loading and bringing it back. And I remember once Dad had gone to take care of cattle, and Jimmy was just a young fellow, and he was supposed to be doing the packing of our year's supply. And I think it was the twins that one, he had promised them he'd make them some donuts. And we were in school, and Murray was teaching us in the front room. And I came out into the kitchen to get a drink of water. And there was Jimmy. He had the pack string all saddled out at the hitching post, ready to go. And he remembered he promised them he'd make the donuts. They were standing there rolling donuts, cooking, and Mother was just having a fit. And he had on his spurs and hat and everything, ready to go, but he made some donuts before he left. So he was late getting home that night with a string.
So after your week long of going out and getting supplies,
At least that.
there was other times during the year that you went out, or that was
A
just the
few.
main one?
Sometimes you use, or if something broke that he couldn't fix, you know, without, it was something that you, bail and wire and leather couldn't, or the forge in the blacksmith shop that Dad couldn't fix, why he'd have to order from town.
Now, did you go out there to get your mail also, or was there
Oh,
something
yes,
on the boat?
that's where we got, no, the boat didn't come near us.
Okay.
It was 7 miles downriver, and the trail was so dangerous on the Oregon side that we didn't get any mail from that way.
So that was your
We
only
thought those people
way out.
downriver really had it fancy, you know.
So you mentioned about going out and selling the cattle. So this was a big cattle drive, or?
Gathered them off the top of the mountain in September and cut out the dry cows or whatever was out. And we always kept our beef till they were 2-year-old steers at that time. And started them down, took them down, freeze out. And I didn't realize till the year that Dad said I was old enough, I think I was 14, to help him take the beef to town. And I was so happy because I was his cowgirl then. And I didn't realize till we got down on the Naha there and hit the road. Those cattle had never ever seen a moving vehicle in their life, a motorized vehicle. So from there down about 12 miles to the bridge, what it's called, the little community of Naha, they stampeded back and forth up that road until they just would give themselves out. Dad said he figured they lost 100 pounds that first 12 miles. And he would go ahead and try to warn, especially these tourists, you know. The people that lived on the Naha knew if they saw livestock coming the road, they stopped their cars.
Right.
But these tourists would just keep, I'm going through this. And Dad would warn, now, I'll take you through slowly. These are wild cattle. And you follow, stay right behind my horse. And this one man, Dad said later it was a Cadillac. And after a while, he got in a hurry. And I was behind the cattle, trying to keep him going forward, you know. And suddenly he revved up his car, pulled right out around Dad, and started into that herd. Well, it just happened that this old Okanagan bull we had, Dad was going to sell him because he was mean and he didn't put out a good calf crop as he expected. And that car came right head to head with that old bull. And he put his head down and he put his horns right through that man's radiator. Oh, that man was furious and the steam was boiling. I could see it from back down. And he was cursing. By the time Dad rode up to him, Dad said, now you know why I told you to stay behind me. And he said, you've got to pay for this. And Dad said, no, that's your problem. He said, I asked you to stop and you wouldn't do it. And so we finally got the kettle on, and as I was in back going behind him, he was still cussing and raving there. And I laughed.
So you didn't have a very big house at Saddle Creek.
Well, I thought it was pretty big for down in there.
So where did everybody sleep?
Well, we had an 8-foot wide porch around 2 sides of the house. The cover, the house roof came on out to that. And on the one north side, they built a little, one more thick room there for us girls. And in the summer, when we were down there, most of the beds went out on that porch because it was so hot, you know, night and day. And the rest of the time in that big living room, it was huge.
Oh, was it?
Yes. And when Chuck got old enough, he was the rough and tough pioneer, you know, and he slept in the barn loft,
Oh,
in the hay. Well, first we had a 2-wheel wagon to haul wood and stuff in from up the creek. And he put a lot of hay in that, slept in that. He was really roughing it, you know. And then he'd sleep in the barn loft. And then up at the upper place in the summer, Dad had extra hard help. Those men slept in the barn loft up there, which is really more comfortable than most of the old straw tape mattresses.
When you were sleeping out like that, did mosquitoes bother you?
There weren't any
There
mosquitoes.
weren't?
It's
Okay.
too dry down there.
Oh, okay.
And so
That
you
helped.
didn't know what a mosquito was until you went on top of the mountain.
Okay.
And Jimmy said once, told some tourists up at Half Point, they remarked about the big mosquito. And Jimmy had a milk cow up there. That's when Bill, I think, was a baby. And he very seriously told him, oh, he said, we do have the biggest mosquitoes, I think, in the whole West. He said, they're big enough, he said, they'll kill a milk cow and then stand there and rattle the bell for the calf to come. And those people went back down to the Mohawk store and told it as the real truth.
did you sew all your clothes or did you order them?
Oh no, everything was homemade except the men's jeans, you know. And as each one got bigger, the next one down got those jeans, you know, and they were passed on and on. But jeans lasted a long time. And Mother made most all of the shirts, and she made us girls dresses. And then she had a treadle machine and a portable that she'd take to the cow camp in the summer. And I have one just like it at home that I found. And she would tell us, now, you take good care of this, because the next one will be wearing it. You know, when it gets too small for you, you take good care of it. So you had to keep that in mind. Even when we were sliding down the good slick hillside on our butts, you know, having fun, we kind of thought this is after wearing the bottom of our jeans out, but it was more fun. You had to make your own fun there.
Did the girls always wear dresses, or did you get to wear slacks
When
too?
we wore jeans when we were out working with the men, doing men's work. But when I got to the house, I had to change into a dress. And I remember one time, I think it was long about in that 12 and 13-year age, Mother said, now Violet, go change your dress, into your dress. And Charlie had been riding with me and Dad all day. I remember stomping my foot, which is a no-no in our house. You weren't supposed to stomp your feet at your parents. And I said, why do I have to? Charlie doesn't have to go change. None of the boys do, and I've been doing work just like they have. Why should I get into a dress? Mother said, because you're a girl. I said, what difference does that make? She said, someday you realize the difference. And then you'll be glad that I made you do it. I agree with her.
Can you give me an idea of what a day would have been like as far as for Mother Ethel, as far as, I mean, she's got this huge family to cook and sew and clean and everything. It's
And a
just,
hard man.
yeah, it just boggles my mind.
It
How
did
she got it all
even me
done.
sometimes,
Yeah.
when I'd watch her.
I mean, who was the first one out of bed in the morning?
Mother and Dad. Dad to go tend to the horses and get ready to ride while she fixed breakfast for him. And many a time, especially as the days got shorter, he'd wake Charlie or I, or both of us up. We'd have our breakfast and have our horse saddled, and then have to sit there on a chair for an hour till it got light enough so we could go ride all day. I used to think, why didn't he let us sleep that much longer? But no, 4 o'clock was getting up time.
Whoa. And so you milk the cow in the morning, or?
Well, whoever didn't go riding
I see,
went to milk the cow.
I see.
Tend to the chickens, if we had chickens, and all the other, do the irrigating during that season.
Did you have pigs, hogs?
No, Dad, once Mother bought 2 wiener pigs and packed them over her saddle in the gunny sacks. She was determined to have fresh pork. And they got almost to butchering size and had them up at the upper place in an area near a grain field. And we had to go up on top of the mountain to the cow camp for some reason, all of us. Came back, Dad came back down first. And the pigs had gotten into the fence, to the stacks of grain hay, and just burrowed all under there, and till the haystack was full and half over. He took a rifle and shot the pigs
That was it?
and left them. That was the only time we ever had pigs again. I remember Mother crying. And I said, why did he do it? And she said, he's never liked pigs, and he didn't want them. And she said they destroyed a lot of hay that we might need very badly this winter. I think I've talked enough, haven't I?
Okay. Anybody else got another question for Aunt Violet?
Chuck just went out the door.
He'll be back. I do have one, but I don't know if you answered it already. What was your favorite memory of living there, Aunt Violet?
What's your favorite memory growing up?
Of growing up there?
I
What was
think
your-
of evenings, whether we had company or not, gathering around the old kerosene lamp and the family, the folks talking and visiting, and that feeling of being so close and loved and wanted.
Uh-huh.
You know, it's a wonderful feeling. And down in there, where you were isolated, you felt that more than out in a community, you know.
Yeah.
And they made such a special thing for what a lot of people nowadays is unimportant. The 4th of July was very important to our folks. Dad would take pack horses and go up to the top of the mountain on the north slope and get frozen ice, you know, that was in the drifts and snow in the north hillside, wrapped in canvas, bring it down and make homemade ice cream for the 4th of July. And to this day, I like ice cream on the 4th. And they did things like that that made it very special for us.
Were your birthdays special? Did they celebrate
Yes.
them?
Quite a few of us had birthdays. Like Jimmy and Alan's was on the same day, so Mother only had to make 1 cake for the 2 boys. And Marjorie's and mine was 2 years and 20 days apart, so she made 1 cake for us. And of course the twins 1 cake, so she lucked out there.
Yeah.
But she made it a special occasion. And usually it was a little homemade gift. And even at Christmas time when we were young children, we made one another little gifts and kept it secret, you know. I remember going out into what we call the saddle house, where we kept the old cabin that out in front of the house that was a little one, and that turned into this, where we kept all our saddles. And going out there and shutting the door so I could whittle to make a little gift. And that's the way we'd sneak way up behind a rim rock or somewhere to fix our gift for Christmas time.
Did Grandma and Granddad celebrate their own birthdays also, or just the
You
children?
know, I didn't remember it at that time. Maybe they did in their own way, you know.
Yeah, but not
No, it was all to the children.
the children.
And with 8 of them, you know, that kept.
Yeah, that was enough.
Any more questions for Aunt Violet? Okay.
I was going to say one thing about Paul Farnsworth.
Oh, yes, I think we had to ask that question.
When they lived, Uncle Carl and Aunt Lottie, we call them, lived in the Enterprise. He was watermaster in the whole county. And we thought so much of him because we were about the same age as their children. Catherine was oldest, and then Willis, and then Helen, and then Paul. Am I right? And Willis and Alan looked so much alike that Dad said you would have thought they were at least first cousins instead of second, I think it may be. And
They would second.
because they were both blonde curly haired with blue eyes. And they were good pals. And they could get into a lot of trouble. That was his father. And we really thought a lot of him. And Catherine, we loved her. She was a pretty gal and the oldest, and was starting to date the boys. And of course she got lots of teasing from all of us. And
So Willis and Catherine and
Catherine
Helen
was oldest,
Paul,
then Willis.
they're children of Charlotte, who was called Lottie.
Lottie.
Wilson Farnsworth, right?
Yes.
Granddad Pete's cousin?
Cousin.
Is that correct? Okay. Can you think of, I have a question here from Gail Timmons, who is Paul's cousin. And she was interested to know if you had any stories about visits and times with them when you got together.
I remember once, they came into Snake River. Dad took horses out and brought them in. And I was disappointed because he didn't bring the children with him. And Mother said, well, we'll be going out this fall and you get to play with them. So that's enough. They wanted to come in.
Now, so these were close to cousins. Did you have other cousins that you
All the
were
marches
acquainted with?
on the Enola River were all cousins.
Okay.
And there were lots of them.
Okay.
Then when I married my husband, I didn't realize till just about the time I married him that his mother was a Warnock.
Oh.
And one starting way up in Enola River, there was a Warnock and then a Marks and then a Warnock and a Marks all the way down past the little community. And when we were dating, we'd go to the Grange dances down in Enola. People say, now they've got to quit talking about anybody because it's related to one or the other of them.
Plus, you couldn't get away with a thing, right?
No.
Okay, everything that we asked Aunt Violet, we want you to answer again.
I'll wait till Violet gets in here so she can defend herself. You know, there's a lot of stuff that she said that
You
aren't
just,
true.
you probably just want to extend
No,
them.
I really do like to hear comments from people that some of the things that we did when we were kids. The first thing I did, as I said, I had to defend myself living around Violet. I had to learn some of her tricks of trade. For once, we didn't get along very well. I got along just the distance of a well-thrown rock. And the point is that when we get a well-thrown rock, it took me years to learn that she was left-handed. And she would throw rocks at me, and I would miss half the time that I threw. And hell, she'd be clobbering me with a left-handed thrown rock. And I didn't realize that she was left-handed, and that's why I was getting hit more than she was. So we didn't get along too well because of that and many things. One, she demanded that I share every bit of work with her, which was not the right thing to do to a boy that was in the ages of that I was and being dominated by an older sister. Interesting relationship we had. If a cougar screamed, it wasn't a cougar to her, you know. It was one of the old cats had a raccoon tree down for the barn. It wasn't a cougar. We had, Violet always seemed to pick a horse that bucked her off. And I had to go get, she hated to be bucked off and be left, especially if she had the rifle on the saddle, because she couldn't shoot the horse or me. We had a good relationship. I always felt that Dad allowed her to get away with a lot more. And I used this excuse, well, hell, she's just a woman. It didn't work in our family. There was 5 boys and 3 girls, and you know, you're overwhelmed when you have that ratio. Some of the things the twins and I, in later years, were assisted in our damage that we did to the girls because a Spartan come into the family along the way, and he's my stepbrother, and we demanded and shared equal rights with the 4th girl and the 4th boy in the family. So Ace was a big assistance to me, even though he was very dangerous to live around. We had, Bonnet and I had a good relationship as long as I caught her horse, saddled her horse, milked the cows, and we moved the chickens over across Saddle Creek from the ranch, and Violet would demand that I go shut the chicken house door at dark every night. Whoever we traded off, you could either cross the creek down by the blacksmith shop, hop on the rocks across, climb up the sandbank, and close the chicken house door, or go out to the barn, cross the creek on the footbridge, come back, and be just right over there where you started in the first place. Well, I thought I'd break her of this. Oh, won't you close the chickens for me tonight? No, I won't. And I thought I'd break her this habit. So one night, she was mad at hell. She took all the lanterns and half the cow
I was
dogs.
scared to death of the dark.
And I'm talking, you be quiet. See, I get away with this. But, so I sent her, I said, oh, I'm not closing them over. She went around the barn naturally, and dogs and 2 lanterns. And I went down to the blacksmith shop and up and come up in the big old apricot tree there, where she would walk under.
Right by the
And
chicken.
I jumped on top of her and let out a scream, and first she fainted, and then she got herself in a position that she could defend herself by swinging 2 lanterns, left and right-handed. He didn't have left-handed, or hers come into work. But I took quite a beating. Dog bites, burns from lanterns, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
One of the things that kind of helped us a relationship where when it come her turn, she went over to the chicken house and closed the door. That was one of the many little problems we had through life. And it was other thing going trout fishing. We had a system on the Saddle Creek. We would fish up the creek and down the creek. We'd go as far as we could fish, and fish was a part of our life and our diet. Fishing especially was part of us kids' life because we fished to get out of work, is what we did. And we always caught plenty. But Violet cheated on this fishing detail. There was a lot of big, nice trout holes in Saddle Creek, and there still is. Of course, most of them are brushed over now. But we would say, we'd come back, maybe we had 15 nice trout. And then we'd say, where'd you catch them? Oh, I got the record. Up in number 10 hole. I caught 10 in the number 10 hole this time. Last time it was big 6. So she was stepped ahead of me on that many trout. I kept thinking, she's cheating on this count that she got out of one hole. And we continually did that till Ace Martin come in to the scene, and Ace and I sneaked up to one of the holes one time and counted the trout she caught out of there. She was sort of short about 6 when she got back to the ranch, because she really didn't tell the truth on how many she got out of a certain hole, but she could sure tell a good lie. Violet had the ability to terrorize boys. It was a frightening thing when twins and one little boy, about the size of these two little fellas running around here, and myself started getting together and kind of, well, I would say climb up on Violet to get after her, but you can think of some pretty nasty things to do to an older sister if you got some thinking up here. But Violet and I got along pretty good in the long run, as long as I said, saddle her horses and put her horse, and milk the cows for her, and close the chicken door, and these other items. Now there's some questions I'm sure you like to ask. I could never get her to go out and get the mail. It's usually we went once a week for the mail, either when we were up top or at Ranch Hagen or at the lower ranch. She was 16 miles from lower ranch to Freetown, and she was 18 miles from upper ranch to Freetown. So it was a long ride over and back in one day. I could never talk her into, and we traded off going and get the mail. And I could never talk her into taking my turn to go out and get the mail. I tried everything. I got pneumonia, I did everything. But she would never go get the mail for me. Interesting, some of the stories like we saw that bear that time. And there was an interesting thing about, let's see, I figured that would probably be 60 years later. I went into the old home ranch, packed in there on a hunt, do special buck tags and everything. And as we were going around between Little Fork and Two Buck and Log Creek, right up in the thorn tree was an old bear sitting there.
Oh.
And that was that many years ago, and we saw that bear the first time that we jumped and run, come out of the same thorn tree that bear that I saw always used. And interesting. I figured the Violet was full of tricks on me.
Did you have times when you were scared? Did you have really frightening? Did you have really frightening times when you were scared?
No, not really. I think I was more afraid of Violet. No, I really was never scared. I guess we got so busy and doing different things and exploring different avenues of how to either get out of trouble or into trouble. Ace was, when he came into the scene in later years, he was an interesting person because I must have said to Ace 10,000 times while we were still in that country, Ace, I don't think we ought to do this. And those of you that know Ace Martin know that that's a typical statement that I would make to him whenever he got into trouble or got us into trouble. just a little, I'll tell you a story. It's funny, I've told it many times, and I'll tell it once more. Ace and I were going to high school, so we hitchhiked down the bridge with Charlie Crater for the opener of the buck season. Took the rifles and we started up. Jim was supposed to come down at the bridge and pick us up. We hiked up 26 miles to Half Point and arrived just as the door was, the cabin was open. He was getting out to get us. The car had come to get us. We got 2 horses from him. Alan was supposed to meet us at the cow camp, Park Forest cow camp. And we were going on a 3-day buck hunt. Well, we got organized and Alan hadn't met us, and so we were going down the Battle Creek, and we took off and went over. We were going down Battle Creek Trail, and it got dark on us. And he says, you know, there's an old Indian trail goes down through the pothole. I think we can cut right down through the pothole and get break the Battle Creek and get to the ranch really easy. It was getting dark. I said, Ace, I don't think we'll do this. And I said, we go right on over and hit Battle Creek Trail. Take the other trail right down to Alan Hager's ranch. Oh, I said, that'll be fine. I said, we're getting on good. Well, what we did, we went down in there and got our horses log jammed up and had to take our saddles off and leave and turn them loose, and we hit down in there. It was just black and hell. I was holding on to the Ace's belt buckle, and we was going around these ledges in there, and suddenly Ace let go of me, and I heard this big crash and bang off down below me, and I thought maybe he killed himself, and he damn did, and I says, well, what are you, where are you, Ace? And he says, don't come down this way. He had fell off about a 40-foot cliff, hit the top of a big red fir and logged the top of it out, and hit down in the huckleberry patch and into the quaking asp, and logged out of about an acre down through till he ended up laying flat of his back in the West Fork of Battle Creek. And I went down there and I just read about this new resuscitation way to get the guy alive, and I was going to get old Ace alive, so you know, open his mouth. He thought I was kissing him, he was dying, and I was kissing him. Wow. Well, you know, we had a fun time there. We got a couple of nice bucks. We started out, of course I was always the one that had to walk and lead, and we had the 2 bucks on our 2 saddle horses, and we crossed the Freeze Out saddle and up and over the Freeze Out lookout, and we got up there, those 2 bucks, and went out to one of them big old red firs that lays right down to the ground, and there was 2 bucks in there. We just got out and was going to head for the lookout over Half Point where Jim was, and here comes 3 drunks down the road in a pickup. And they said, boys, we'd like to hire you to haul a buck out of down in the Berkshire Rock Creek. I said, yeah, we'd be glad to. How much you pay us? He said, oh, I think it'd be worth $10. Well, $10 is $1 million. We said we'd do it. Took us out on the point. I said, now, show us down there where the buck is and get him. They pointed us out to where he was down there by some log jams. That wasn't very far, you know. I said, well, that's one of the easy $10. So we went down there and rode the buck on, of course. AC rode his horse, and I walked and led it, you know, as usual. We got up and just, here come these guys, they've been over to camp getting a little grease lightning again, and they said, well, that didn't take you very long, boys. I don't think it's worth $10. That's about 5. They said, Charlie, he said, where'd we get that one from? I said, well, it's down there in the head of Rough Creek. He said, well, I think we ought to take him back where we got it. He said somebody might see him down there, not see him and think we stole the buck. If we took him back down there, then Maybe the other fellow would pay us that other $5. Well, it didn't take me long what I used to do, and they said, pay or the buck goes back in the canyon.
Yeah.
They gave us some $5 and I almost broke their arms to get them out of their wallet, see. But little things, trick of the trade in the mountains when you're raised and how you try to do it out. Any, you start asking me something else.
Anybody got any questions?
Well, I have one. Peter Lee was telling a story about how hard the cattle dogs worked on the ranch. And something
what?
of cattle dogs.
Uh,
And Granddad sent one of them to get a bull, bring it down, or they were out gathering the cattle or something. And he said that that dog worked for 3 days and finally got that bull down.
yeah.
The hocks of the bull, the bull's hocks were red and bloody, and the dog was exhausted and had to rest for a week.
Well, that's understandable in that farm in brush country. How hard cow dogs really work. Dad trained a cow dog, and an interesting thing, and Martha will verify this one of the few things she will. But Dad, when he trained his dogs, he never hit one of his dogs.
No?
He never slapped them or kicked them. Pinched their front paw. He'd take that dog and he'd just scold him something terrible into his paw and squeeze that front paw until the dog cried. And that was the punishment. And I think it hurt his cow dogs worse than beating them, I'm sure. But, it was a unique way of training dogs, that's why. And basically what happened in there, just to give you a quick rundown on the cattle, our cattle would calve over in the basin and up, and then they work up through water spout and around the benches, goes through the rough corral fences, turn them loose on the benches, and then round them up, put them in the big corrals at the Saddle Creek, head of Saddle Creek. The bulls would be down in the lower Saddle Creek, the low country, and we would brand, vaccinate, whatever we had to do, earmarks our cows and calves and split them out, and then leave the cows and calves over in the big holding corrals overnight, and Dad would go down and get the bulls, bring them up, and turn them loose. Of course, the cows were starting to come and eat then. The bulls headed for the cows headed for the high country. The next morning they try to open the gate, and those old cows were rid of it all. So that's the way we more or less handle our cattle in the fall. I would say 75% of our cattle come out of the high country and sell. The local cattle knew when that first started there was something wrong, and it was time to come home. But where I'm getting to the story of the cow dogs is the fact that the cow dogs there was lots of thorn brush in that country, and it's pretty hard to work cattle in on your saddle horse and without tearing up your rigging and your shafts and everything. And you take the cow dogs. Dad would always have about 3 good dogs, and usually then several females and puppies, raising more dogs. But he would use these dogs to get those bulls out of there because they were ready to fight. It was breeding season and they were ready to do anything. And they'd use those dogs to get the bulls out of the corn patches and get them all the way up Saddle Creek. And just one hell of a time to get those bulls out. One year I thought he was the meanest bastard that I ever saw in my life, my own father. He had 2 Theiston bulls with wide horns. And they hated each other from the day they were born, and they were fighting. Dad bought these 2 bulls out from Chapman, and they were teaching the bred bulls. Good bulls, big bulls, but they fought at the drop back. I mean, they fight each other, but mostly each other. Well, Dad was real late getting bulls. He went down below the rough creek fence, and Dad was real late. Howdy, you want to tell the story? But he showed up just at dark with 5 head of bulls, with 3 bulls with no horns on. He had roped those old bulls, he put those old bulls in the milk milk cow's krill there at the Mount Rock Creek. Roped him, snubbed him up to the thing, snubbed him up to the krill fence, logs in the krill fence, took an axe and cut their damn horns. That's what I thought it was. And you can imagine what those bulls were. There was solid blood from the tip of the nose to the heel. He just fought his dogs out. They fought his dogs out. They fought his horse out. He just couldn't hound anymore until he finally got him to ground. He had him. Those old bulls were coming to the dead run up that creek once he'd had it. But it was an interesting thing for a man to do. You can't do anything else. You've got to have a solution.
Well, you had a special bullwhip that you used.
Well, that we did, yes. Dad had one, but we never used it too much.
Oh, really?
It tended to scare your cattle and get them, make them wild. But it was a point where if you, the less jostling up your cattle you did, the better off you were. And, a lot of talk about taking the steers out over 3,000 saddle and down the Omaha. A lot of those dudes that come along their cars. We had about 3 routes actually we took with the beef steers. Sometimes we, depending on the grass, we'd take them out over Hat Point and down past Warnick Crow, down across Horse Creek, out and down Deer Creek, and come in, Deer Creek come in right at the bridge there at well, they always, when they was outriggers find out whether our steers are coming that way or not because our beef cattle, normally he'd ship about 300 days. He'd take about 300 days, dry cows and steers and everything. He would, then they'd find out it was coming because there was rodeo there in the middle of a little town of Omaha, one blacksmith shop, one grocery store, and one a mail post office. And what you had to do, it was quite a rodeo because he roped some of them old snotty cows and took the dolly on the saddle horn and headed across the bridge. And all of us kids would scoop up the side runners and we had our cattle. It was funny to see what happened on that bridge over the rope from that old kid. And that's where those kids learned the rodeo, was right there. They always say the best cowboys in the world, bronc riders in the world, were raised right there on Saddle Creek Ranch. Because if a horse bucked you off, you fell 3,000 feet. You can set up here and tell stories for days, but it just bore the hell out of you. And some of them are interesting only to the person that's telling them how loud his voice is.
Well, I think that all of you had lived a life over there that the rest of us just can't imagine what your daily life was like. As children, did you go out and play? I mean, what did you, we were talking about being afraid of snakes.
No, well, there was times that we watched, especially when there was fishing along the creek. That was cool. And the creeks were high, it wasn't bad, but the old saying Mother said in later years, it said she raised 8 kids and wasn't afraid of said taking care of them and washing them and everything. But said that she often said, watch out for rattlesnakes and don't go near the roof. And that was thousands and thousands of times I've heard her say it. And little story, things you do when you think back on and say, what the hell did I do now? This is quite a cute story. I used to come in to stay with us there and keep me out of trouble for a while. He come down and the twins and I had, we were just learning to swim and we weren't supposed to go near the river. Well, Ace had come down and then he had to leave and we had been swimming, practice swimming over a hole back in the woods and we were out in on this little sandbar that ran in there where we tied the boat up on it. And just the twins and I, and we went over there fishing or swimming. We were out there just about this high, you know, and right against the bluff there was a big old sturgeon's tail about that wide. He was down on digging in his nose to get some sandstone. Dan or Don one got the bright idea of going over and getting we always had a 1/4-inch rope with a sturgeon on it, and catching trout in the creek and come home set a fishing line. We were supposed to be there helping mother can peaches. And so we set the line the next morning. We went over there, and sure enough, the old line was down the river. And he'd fought it. You could always tell if you had most of the time fish on. That old fish would fight the line long enough to let the current swing him down the river, and the old line would be laying on the bank down there. And we had a fish on it, get all inside. Well, I had a 22 Harrington Richardson pistol that I traded from Ace Spartan for coyote hide and a pair of broken spurs. And so there was the old line down the river, and oh boy, we were excited. So I took that old Pete our saddle mule and the dallies around the saddle and drug him up. There was a big old 9-footer we had on there. He was really quite a fish. So we drug him up there, and I shot him between the eyes with the pistol, and we thought, now how are we going to break this mother? You know, she had 1,000 jars of fruit can over there, and we had this fish to smoke in the can. So I just got on the Pete and took off across the Saddle Creek and up through the alfalfa field, drug him right along the upside of the porch, and we called her, Mother, look what we've got for you. Well, I'll tell you, that German Irishman was mad. She started to tell all the things we did wrong. One, we went near the river. Two, we had all these pieces of can, and she said, you got to get rid of that fish. She says, you go put a pack saddle on those 2 pack mules and butcher that big sturgeon and head for the Naha, and you go out to the Naha and go down the river until you give these pieces of fish away. Those fish that didn't, or people that didn't live on the Snake River, loved sturgeon, where they had it all the time. Well, I took off and went out, loaded this big little about, each side about 3 slabs of the sturgeon, and went out to get it charred down the ends, give it to the marchers in the morning, so whoever, shovelings or whoever there, and come back to Grandma's place and left her something in a cool ditch out there. And it was dark there. It was time to go. I said to Grandma, can I stay all night? She said, what'd your mother say? Now this is 16 miles. The ranch. Said, what'd your mother say? I said, well, I don't like to say this, but she told me to get my ass home as soon as I got rid of the sturgeons. Which I never said that until she mentioned it. Well, I got in about 2 o'clock in the morning. I don't think I said a sturgeon line for 3 years. But that's one of the things you do, you don't think about. We're lucky to live through some of our escapades.
Well, if you were riding and it was already dark, you just trusted your horse to know the way?
Sure. And you, certain times of year, most of the times of year, you had a little light enough to see the trail. But you trusted your saddle your horse.
Did you have a favorite horse?
Oh, depending on which one I was riding, I guess.
Okay. Do you have a favorite memory?
Oh, I don't know.
Hey, hang on a minute. I got a question I just got to throw in real quick. Dad was talking about a lot of times the frozen ground on the north, the steer would slip or something. and it would kill them, you know, they'd slide
Right.
and a lot of times they'd get to them quick enough, they'd butcher them out,
What?
you know, salvage the meat
On what?
on a steer or cow that had
Oh,
slipped
yeah,
and
yeah.
rolled.
If you got, usually if they slid, they heat their body up so much that
Yeah,
the meat would freeze or at least be in condition that it wouldn't hurt the meat. If you got there in time so that you could butcher it out,
yeah.
as you said, yeah.
How often would something like that happen?
Well, and you, Rocky, you get it on cow slid off the mountain, and she's ricocheted down there, you know, 3,000 or 4,000 feet,
Yeah.
bounced off boulders and stuff. The meat is pretty beat down.
Yeah,
A lot of bloodshot feeding and everything. We salvaged a lot of meat. We had a problem in that country. You know, an old mule, if he wants to lay down and scratch, he might pick that door right there on the lane on it, and it'd be about that steep, and he'd lay down and scratch and roll and turn over and dust himself, and pretty soon he would turn over once and he was gone. And he'd be 3,000 feet down in the camp. We lost a lot of mules and a lot of our horses that way. Mother lost her favorite saddle. Fact is, the mule that I was, and I think one of us too, was Mother rode out from Saddle Creek to give birth to us at Grandma Jensen's, about 16 miles from the ranch, and wanted mules that were raised in the country that they're going to be used in, because they got sure-footed wherever they were raised. It's an interesting. Dad bought a big purebred sorrel mare. Mark Sproul was working at work at the time. We had this sorrel, and he had a sorrel mare, and it's kind of hard to breed a Jack Burrow to a big mare. It's usually not this particular hip. Instead of standing the mare in to the Jack to do his job well. Dad was going out to get some business out of the enterprise, and when he got out there, before he left, he told John Sprouse and us boys that, boy, when that mare comes to meet, you be sure that Jack Burrow get there. But, oh, can't bother. Can't bother. He's not big enough to do that. Well, and we were supposed to breed him to a little spotted mare that Slim Overfeld had traded Dad to, and they got spotted stud on that mare. Anyway, we thought it'd be real funny to have that mare suddenly come up with a mule. She gave birth. So we had the system all set, and mare coming to eat. Dad was gone, and we bred the Jack Burr to the mare, and so Dad was excited, you know, she was ready to fool him, and then, you know what happened. He went out to the barn one morning, and there that mare had a mule colt, but he was about that long. He went for the rifle, and we headed for the hills. He was going to shoot us off. Well, that was kind of interesting that we got through that. That Jim's, your dad, Billy Jim, he had a white mare that bred to that Jack Burr, the same circumstance, one of the best. In fact, is that mare that had that colt that was illegitimately bred out of the system. What was interesting was that Dad broke that mule as a saddle mule, and he used that mule to rope tails at the rodeo in several places. One he kept from the nest first, down in Grangeville, on a mule yet, and it was a real attraction.
Yeah.
That just doesn't happen.
Which white mare was that? Bridget or Whitey or?
Whitey,
Whitey.
Okay,
Yeah, Bridget was the younger mare.
young.
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I know the name, that's about it. I can remember Whitey,
Yeah,
but
Whitey was Bridget's mother, of course. And Jim, we got on Bridget, we snubbed her up there in the corral, and well, I think I told you when you was over there, I showed you, I said, he got on Bridget that morning, and we didn't have her broke very well, and Jim got on her. Jim wasn't much of a problem. Alan, but Jim, he wanted to get along easy with anything. Kids that didn't buckle weren't any good. What was comical was that Jim got on Bridget, and there I had a corral there, and he kept the horses right there at the barn at night, and that corral sloped a little bit. Jim got on Bridget. She just dug his head right into a horse manure pile out there. Jim got up and shook himself off. He said, you know, she bucked me off and stood still while she did it. She could ever do it. But, I had the pleasure of several times to see a bottle get bucked off. Especially, he had a horse named Dickie Fisk. Dad traded him for Dick Fisk for a bunch of pack horses, and he come with a bunch of mules. So Dad had to kind of give that horse to Violet to get along with her more than else. And he was a good-looking pony. He was a snuffy little bastard, but he could sure buck you off and very tricky about it. I don't know how much. She'd get bucked off and the horse would walk over back to the cow camp. She'd come in just madder than hell. What are you mad about? Well, I had my rifle on the saddle, I couldn't shoot that son of a bitch. He bucked me
say it
off.
that way.
And of course, that was the ideal turtle.
Do you have a fond memory of your mother you can share?
Oh, gee, they were all fun. My mama was quite a comedian. She was a good mother. Dangerous sometimes, but a tough one. Many times we would be up at the upper ranch, that's 9 miles up the mountain, up those switchbacks. We'd get her up early with the hay and crew, she'd fix breakfast with the hay and crew, and two older girls, the twins and I, whatever, at the lower ranch and pick fruit and garden and then can all day, and then go back up that mountain with stuff on the saddle to fix the evening meal with. So she was a pretty sturdy lady. And lots of times as kids, of course, we'd get in the sturgeon business on purpose sometimes. We were asked to set the sturgeon lines, and then we'd take one mule and we'd lay that old sturgeon over the pack saddle and put a wet gunny sacks over and tie the head to the tail underneath. And you could go up that 9 miles and those old sturgeons would stay alive. And as long as you kept your gunny sacks wet, every time you cross your trip there, cross my trip. And they kind of got up there and put them in the spring, in the ditch from the spring. And well, I can tell you how many times we had sturgeon for a couple of weeks up there, live sturgeon. Well, I've talked a little bit about you.
First of all, I want to thank Violet and Chuck. They both told things that even I hadn't heard before, and I really appreciated it. And I don't know where Chuck go.
Back to the kitchen.
I especially want to thank him. He told so many things that I hadn't heard before, and his way of telling them was just very precious to me. Pardon? Oh, I'm sorry. Anyway, Violet has, over the years, told me so many things, and I've always tried to store them in my memory, because I left Snake River, the Oregon side, when I was really quite young. And, of course, I was on the Idaho side, then of summertime, staying with Hazel and Alan and Daddy and Lenora up in the Seven Devils for several summers after that. So there's things that I know of that happened up there with Chuck and the twins, and even Kim, that probably Violet doesn't know of, so I have a little different slant on it there. But I do, those stories that Chuck told was just fabulous, and I really loved it and appreciated it. I always felt like with the twins, being so close to them in age, and they were always, even when I was a little kid, and they were really treating me pretty bad, there wasn't anything that they could do wrong in my eyes. I just adored them. And I could see them sit and look at each other. I knew exactly what they were thinking, and it wasn't good. And it was the same way when I was living in Riggins, and the latter part of my high school years, when they got back from the Pacific and got home, and as I always called it, their horny days, like all the servicemen, and it was such a fun time. They left all of that behind them. They didn't talk about the war, and they were just so glad to be home and trying to make a living and having a good time and forgetting that terrible time. And AC, when he got home, he would come out from Snake River, and then Leon came up and boarded with Mother, and it was a beautiful, beautiful time in our lives. We run around, and frankly, we drank, we had fun, and I can honestly say our morals weren't bad. And I think the servicemen always run around and tried, but you know, we were a pretty nice bunch. And I could sit here all evening long and tell some of the hilarious stories that the twins and Leon and AC and them always told when they get together. It was always fun, and I can see my mother sitting in that wheelchair. And now here's something else about our family I must put in, I didn't get in my notes, that I have told people about, and it's just amazing to them. Mother would sit in that wheelchair in the house, or most often in the telephone office, and here'd come Jimmy. He'd stop in, going to or from town after work or on weekends. Here would come Dan or Don or Leon, and even AC, and the times that Chuck was home. And this is such a beautiful memory to me. They'd come stomping in the house. Hi, Mom. They'd lean over and kiss her. Then they'd go on about the business that they were doing there at home, you know, changing clothes or just sitting around drinking coffee and visiting. They'd get ready to leave, walk by Mom, bye Mom, lean over and kiss her. And you know, you don't see that very often nowadays, but they never thought about it, they loved her, they just did it. And that's been one of my very fondest memories, is all these handsome grown men, so full of spit and vinegar, but Mother always had that kiss coming and going. And now the twins, I can just talk about the twins and Chuck for hours. And more so the twins, because I was so close to them. And the twins were never physically mean to me. It was more of a threat, and a constant threat, because I tagged after them. I was the ragtail all the time. And being the youngest, and I do know how hard Mother and Dad, Jimmy and Alan, and Violet, and Marjorie, and Chuck, I do know, even as a little child, I wasn't school age yet, I know how hard they worked. Very, very hard. It took a lot of hard work, and sometimes anger, and a lot of joy, and an awful lot of love to keep that big ranch going, and 8 kids. And Dad would bring home other young people that, it was, during my time, it was the Depression years, their family was broke up, and they didn't have any place for those children to go, and maybe those young teenagers were getting in trouble. Daddy would drag them home, Mom would take care of them, feed them, and they didn't have very much, but there was always room for one more. And that was just part of our life too. It was just part of it. Max was one of them.
Mhm, Max Walker.
And there were several others. And I think that speaks well for Mother and Dad. And now there was, I have to stop and think, Dan and Dawn. Beautiful, beautiful people. They were so unique in their own way. It wasn't just because they were twins. It was just because they were such great, great people. When they were little and when they were grown. I'm sorry, I cried. They're worth crying over. And those little boogers, oh man. Daddy always had a smokehouse going. And all of us kids, we would rather have smoked venison than candy. Oh, that was such a treat. And Mother would just dole it out, you know. And we didn't get near enough. We were always hungry. We were always out rambling. We were busy all the time. We never sat still. So therefore, we were always hungry. And so the twins had a little flour sack. I think sugar come in it, didn't it, Violet? Mm-hmm. And probably they snitched it out of Mother's cupboard, because Mother usually made my dang bloomers out of those flour sacks, or those little sugar slacks. But anyway, they had this little sugar sack. They'd get me up in the rim rocks, and you had to climb up in this tall, of course, to me it was tall, to grown-ups it wasn't so tall, smokehouse to get this dried venison. And the twins would give me this sack, and they'd say, now you crawl up there, and you get a bunch of smoked venison in this sack. And, well, I knew if I got caught, I was going to get spanked. And I knew if I didn't do it, they were just going to really get rough with me. And I wasn't smart enough. I was the dumbest kid that ever lived. And I wasn't smart enough to get my pockets full of smoked venison. I would get a bunch in that sack, then I would take it back to them thinking, now, I got this for them, they're going to give me some. They'd take the sack and away they'd go, and I wouldn't get any. Now, that's being really dumb. I kid you not. But this has been one of my fondest memories. And the twins and I did not like baths. We just didn't like baths. And we didn't like wintertime because we had to wear long underwear. Oh, how we hated that underwear. Well, one spring, the green grass was just starting up, and we thought we could get out of wearing long underwear. And we could start going barefooted. The back side of the house was just right up against the hillside there. And of course, where the eaves come down, the water dripped down, and you know that groove along, you've seen it along homes all your lives, there was this fine gravel where the water coming down off of the roof would wash the dirt away and leave this trail of fine gravel. Mother had us in the kitchen, and you know, you didn't throw out the bathtub of water. Every darn one of you took a bath in that water. And she'd scrub us down, and the twins were standing in front of the kitchen stove, and I was just getting out of the tub. And Mother had gone to get the clean clothes to put on us. And we thought, oh, now she's just going to bring out the summer clothes, you know. Here come Mother. She had to make that step down from the living room into the kitchen, and she had 3 pair of long underwear draped over her arm, put on us kids. Well, I don't know, the twins, I remember the twins, I can see their faces looking up and looking at that long underwear and looking at each other, and they took off running out that kitchen door. Well, the twins were running, so that meant I should run too, you know. And so I took off running after them. They went down the length of the porch, jumped off the porch, around the corner to the back of the house. Now, mind you, this was in the spring. They were just as white as one of those sheets of paper, and I could see those white hind ends and those legs just going like that. Well, we were all 3 doing fine until we got to the back of the house, and they hit that trail of little fine rocks, and we were tender-footed then. And they were running, picking up their feet because they were hurting so bad, you know, and got clear around the other side, went around the side of the kitchen and up on the porch. There stood Mother very patiently with the long underwear. She says, all right, now I can remember the look on her face with this funny little smile. She says, all right now. She says, you've got your run over with. Let's wash your feet and get your own underwear on. And you know, I could just still feel that, oh no, after all of that. But that's one story. Another one was, Daddy finally got Mother a washing machine. And it was one of those horrible old wooden things that you stood and pumped the handle back and forth, back and forth. Well, on wash day, everyone cleared the flats, you know, mainly the older ones. That's when there was always work to do with the horses and the cattle and everything. So us little ones, and Chuck always snuck out on this too. The twins and I would get stuck with this. Well, we'd hide out until Mother would get ready to get the hot water and everything ready. Then she'd start yelling for us, and sometimes she would have asthma, and she'd have to blow the whistle. And we knew we had to come when that whistle blew. And, oh, we hated it because we had to stand there and pump that handle back and forth to run the agitator inside. That was one of my memories. And at Grandma's house, I remember being there. Now, I don't remember Grandmother Jensen too much, except for the fact that she was a very, to me, I'm sure Grandma loved me, and but to me she was a very harsh person. But she'd had a harsh life, so she had a right to be. But she was very tall and very imposing, and I was very, very intimidated by her. But I remember that house there, and Grandma always, the twins and I would ride out, and we had these little lard buckets. Mother'd always hook the lard bucket over our saddle horn or else tie it to the saddle. And we'd get out there, and I'm sure Mother put letters and stuff in those little lard buckets for us to take out. And Grandma always had huge, to my eyes. They were probably normal like that, but being little, they looked huge like that. The most wonderful sugar cookies.
They were.
Were they really that big?
Yeah.
Oh, and we'd get the mail and everything, and if there was fresh vegetables and stuff that Grandma wanted to send in or anything, you know, she'd tie it to our saddles, and we'd take off, and she'd tell us, now, here's your buckets of sugar cookies, and I'll tie them on your saddle. I could just hear her voice so plain. Now, you are not to touch those until you get up on top of the saddle.
Freeze outside.
Yeah, up on top of freeze out saddle. And she says, then you can eat your sugar cookie lunch. But she says, don't touch them until then. Oh, I'm telling you, just the minute that house was out of sight, those sugar cookies just went down like butter. Then, of course, we starved to death all the rest of the way back to Saddle Creek. And that's another funny little story. Let's see, twins in the bath. And I remember one year, I had gotten 2 new pair of shoes for Christmas. And I was riding this, I don't remember what old horse it was, but anyway, Daddy had parked the mowing machine, and with a sickle up like this, and he parked it up pretty close to the fence. And I was on this old mare, and typical kid's horse, they hated kids, you know, and they'd do anything to rake us off of their back. They'd run under limbs, they'd get up against trees, and anything to get us kids off of their backs. Well, she took off with me up alongside the field, and she got mad at me. I wanted her to go someplace she didn't want to go. So she went in between that sickle sticking up on the mowing machine and the fence, and it caught this leg right here on the side of the knee. Well, of course, that leg wasn't any bigger around. And it was a horrible long cut. I've still got the long scar. So it was getting along towards evening time, and what I remember this, I don't remember the pain or the blood or anything like that, but I do remember Mother cleaning up this wound on my leg, and seeing how deep it went, and her and Daddy was afraid it had cut a tendon. And of course, I'm sure I was sitting there just screaming my head off. I always did when anything went wrong. And Mother went back in the bedroom, the one bedroom there, and she come out, she was packing a pair of shoes. And I love shoes. And she's packing a pair in each hand. She says, now Kappy, she says, Pete's gonna, she says, your daddy's gonna take you over the mountain and get you out to the doctor to get your leg fixed. Which pair of shoes do you want to wear? Oh, I can remember how thrilled I was. Well, anyway, they put me on horseback, put a pillow under my leg, of course it was all wrapped up, and I remember Daddy got out to in Naha. I have no idea who he got hold of out there that had a car, but then they drove me on out to Dr. Hockett at Enterprise. And Dr. Hockett, of course he deadened it and all of this good stuff, and went in there and found out it had cut that tendon just half in two.
Halfway.
And of course back then, if it had cut it clear in two, I'd have been crippled the rest of my life. But it cut it just half in two, and he said, well, she's going to be fine. So he stitched me up and everything was fine. That was another memory I had. But I could still see those two new pair of shoes. And that's why to this day, I've got a closet and half the floor in my bedroom covered with shoes. And another story is I heard Mother and Dad, some of the family talking about, they had, did Daddy and Mother used to bury melons in the sandbank over by the, okay. I remember being old enough that I either remembered them digging them out or else talking about they were going to, they'd had melons and stuff buried in the sandbank. And I thought, well, I just bet you they missed one when they dug up the last ones. And I remember going over there and practically digging myself out of sight, looking for just one muskmelon or one watermelon that maybe they had left there. And of course there wasn't any, but I remember that. And you talk about things that, the unpleasant memories. I didn't have any unpleasant memories other than the things, one of the things that I hated, and that was the boring ride up and down those damn mountains. And it would be hot or it would be cold, and it was boring, wasn't it, Mike?
What?
Boring.
Yeah.
Riding up and down those damn mountains. Up and down, switchbacks, up and down. And, you know, being a kid, and I wanted to be physically doing something, and there we would sit. Riding up those mountains. It took hours and hours and hours. That's what I hated. Really and truly hated. Now, riding up and down those mountains, I got to tell you a story about, we were up at the Funk Place. Now, how far was it from the Funk Place to the Saddle Creek Pilot?
About 8 miles appendicular.
Yeah, appendicular, as AC used to say. And I remember Chuck just got through saying how far it was, and I forgot. Because I was surprised that it was that far, because I was sure it was 30 or 40 miles. And being a kid. And all of the family was busy doing things. And Violet was there, and she had to do something, and she needed something for a horse. It was either bridles or it was horseshoes or something. And all the saddles were in use, and we had a horse there, and Violet needed these so bad. They were in a gunny sack hanging on the porch down at Saddle Creek. And Violet, I couldn't have been over 4, was I?
About that.
Yeah, I was about 4. So she took a pack saddle and put on this horse, and I think she put an old saddle blanket or something, because here was just the wood frame, you know, that you use for a pack saddle. And I think she put an old saddle blanket over this wood, and she put me on this horse, and she told me exactly what to get, where to get it, and she had to have it. And I know there was one gate that I had to get off of that horse. That's another story. and undo that gate, and then latch it back up, get it put back together, right on into Saddle Creek. And here was just a little 4-year-old girl. And I had to find something to crawl up on to get that gunny sack off of that nail on the gorge, get it up on that pack saddle, and secure it so it wouldn't fall off and I would lose it. And rode that horse back up, undid that damn gate, got that horse through, got the gate hooked back up, and rode clear back up to Saddle Creek. Now, I thought nothing of this.
I think you were 6 that year.
No, I wasn't. I thought nothing of it because it was something that had to be done. But the years after I grew up, I look back on that and I thought, oh my God, that little bitty girl. But it had to be done. And that same trail going up to the funk place, I remember one summer Daddy went out and all of the kids needed hats. Would you believe, I always wanted a cowboy hat. He come home, he had a hat for Chuck, Violet, the whole bloomin' bunch, the twins, they got cowboy hats. Guess what Kappy got? She got a straw coolie hat. Talk about pain and anguish. I hated that dang hat. I hated it with a passion. So we were riding up to Funk Place. We got past the, what was the creek that come through there? We had to ride around and then go up around this big point.
Hat
way
Creek.
up high.
Hat Creek.
Was it Hat Creek? Anyway, I remember getting up there. I had this doggone thing underneath my chin, and I hated that. And I had taken that off, hoping that I was on the tail end, hoping nobody had noticed. And the wind caught that hat. I can still see that hat just
Sailing
going
way
woof and sailing out, clear down, and it went clear out of sight, sailing down that canyon. And I was so happy. I was so happy. I just couldn't have been happier. That dang hat was gone. So I went without a hat the rest of the summer, which I couldn't have cared less because I hated that sucker. Another thing that the twins and I were real good at, and I'm sure Chuck and Violet and Margie all took their turns at doing this too. We had this milk house up at the Funk Place where this spring come up, and it was real cool in there. Dad had built kind of little shelves in there to put the milk pans in so the cream would rise and it would stay cool. And the twins and I would go out and we would very carefully pick straws, and we'd break them off at each end so we could look through them, you know. And we'd sneak in the milk house when we thought no one was looking. And the thing is, we thought that Mother never knew this. Mother never knew it. Well, good heavens, if we'd have been smart, you know, we'd known she went through this with Jimmy and Alan and Violet and Margie and Chuck. But we were the first to ever do this, you know. We were so smart, we were getting away with something. We would edge the cream away from these pans, and we'd stick these straws down there. And we'd just drink milk like crazy. But not enough that we thought it would show. Well, of course it showed. But we got our milk every day doing this. And Mother knew we were doing it, but like, we were dumb kids, you know. And let's see, I had a whole list of funny things here to tell. I'll try not to take up too much time. You're probably all getting hungry. The twins and I, we had range wars on the cliffs or hillsides up above behind the house at Saddle Creek. We all had our gathering of rocks, and that was our cattle. And we would rustle each other's cattle. And the twins had quite an art going. They could rustle theirs. They were smart enough. This shows how dumb I was. They were smart enough. They'd sneak around and find out where the other one had hid his herd of cattle, these pretty little rocks, a whole herd of them. He'd sneak around when he thought the other one was doing something else, and he would just steal 2 or 3 of them. And of course, they were counted. They knew how many cattle they had. but he'd take them back and he'd put them in with his herd of cattle. Well, when I thought the two of them weren't looking, I'd go rustling cattle. I'd take the whole bunch, and then all heck would break loose. You got all my cattle, and they'd run me clear off the hillside. Then when we had potatoes growing, we'd have to go out and pick potato bugs, and I still can't remember what they looked like, but we had to pick potato bugs, and we'd pick handfuls of potato bugs, and we'd get them up on a big flat rock, each one of our bunches of potato bugs, and we'd herd them just like that. We'd spend hours herding potato bugs, and the sad thing about it was, you know, we were supposed to destroy those things, and I'm quite sure those potato bugs got together and breeded and went right back to that garden year after year. And let's see, yeah, rocks and Daddy and oh yes, a favorite memory of a summertime. Daddy wore the long underwear. It was the tops like this on the real thin stripes, and they come down to about mid-thigh, and the rear end of them just had a slit, you know, that was folded over. It was the old style summer underwear that all the men wore. Of a summertime, Dad would take us kids to the swimming place. Jimmy had blasted a trail around this little cliff so we could get down to this little eddy. And back in here was a cave, and but it was such a nice sandbar there, and the water wasn't swift. It just kind of come in there real soft, you might say. And Daddy'd take us there on hot afternoons, and he'd get out there and he'd stand out, and us younger children couldn't go out any farther than that. And he would stand there and he would hang on to us and try and teach us how to swim. But then when he would get up in the more shallow water, here would be my long-legged, tall, gangly daddy standing there with that long underwear on and his backside full of water, and us kids would just go into hysterics, you know. It was kind of insulting to Dad, but it was so funny seeing this big, tall scarecrow of a man in these funny underwear with his hind end hanging down full of water. And he would watch us children, the twins and I, and Chuck were real careful. And then he would see a sturgeon coming in, and he'd make us stand real still. And these sturgeon would come in, and they would swim so close you could reach out and touch them. And it looked just like a shark. But we didn't know anything about sharks there. We were just so thrilled to be that close to sturgeon. And they're a very curious animal. And they would just swim in amongst us kids, and Daddy'd say, now stand still, don't move. They're not going to hurt you. And they would just swim in and out, you know, and it was such a thrill to us kids to get to see these fins swimming around there. And that was a real good memory. And let's see. Oh yeah, the twins fought between each other. Oh, it was knockdown drag-outs. It was bloody war. And I'm telling you, they'd get mad at each other. And Violet and Chuck can tell you, they would just beat the snot out of each other. And they'd bloody each other's noses. But heaven help you if anybody else stepped in. Absolutely no. That was their fight. They settled it. And here's the funny thing about it. When they got that fight settled, you'd see them, little bitty guys like that. And they did this up until the 2nd and 3rd grade. Because I saw, well, I'm telling the story. They would hug, I can remember seeing them walking down the sidewalks in Enterprise doing this. When they got over the fight, they would put their arms around each other and hug each other and love each other and kiss each other. Just smooch each other all over the face. Then they'd go walking off with their arms around each other. And you know, it was a normal thing for us. We saw it all the time. Well, one time, they was in a big fight there at the end of the porch, and Chuck was going to be the boss, and he was going to put a stop to this. He stepped up, and Daddy always kept a whiskey bottle if he had any horse liniment or stuff like that that he had to use on the horses around the hitching post, he'd keep it in a whiskey bottle, and lots of times it would be sitting there on the edge of the porch. Well, the twins were in a real knockdown drag out. Chuck come along, well, I'm just going to put a stop to this, you know, they shouldn't be doing this. So he grabs one by his shirt collar and proceeds to pull them apart. And one of them started, I think it was Dan, that started kicking and hitting at him. So he had to let go of Don and tend to Dan and keep himself from getting injured. Don turns around and grabs that whiskey bottle and just kerboing, just laid Chuck out cold. And then they finished their fight, but it was probably from her telling the story. And Violet can probably confirm this because I think she was there too. They'd been having trouble with I think Dad and Jim and Alan had found some cougar tracks on the trails, and Mother was waiting for Dad to get in that night from something, and I don't know where Jimmy and Alan was. Maybe they were there, but I can't remember. But as I remember Mother telling the story, she was there with just the 4 younger children, but I think maybe Margie Violet was there, and the screen door was up. And it was quite late. It was getting on late, what would be late then, you know. And everything was dark and quiet. And Mother was really anxious, waiting for Daddy and the boys or whoever it was that was supposed to ride in that night because they were late. And nobody showed up. And Mother heard some noise, and the dogs barked a little bit. And then they quieted down. And there wasn't another peep out of them. And then all of a sudden there was this on the porch. And it was so spooky, Mother didn't know if it was a person or a cougar tail hitting or something. And us kids just gathered up around her. And she sat there, you know, just waiting to see what was going to show up at that screen door. And all of a sudden, here's a big mule's face. It had walked up on the porch. Now, do you remember that?
Yeah, little Pete mule.
It was that Pete mule?
Yeah.
I couldn't remember. Well, now, wasn't there a mule named Becky, too?
What?
Wasn't there a mule named Becky?
Becky and Louise.
Becky and Louise, yeah. Well, anyway, that was a story, like I say. I don't remember if I remember Mother, it's just memory from Mother telling me this, or if I remember it from myself.
Yeah.
Then there was stories about, and I can remember this, all of us kids had to have very good table manners.
Yeah.
That was the rule of the family. You had good table manners. No ifs and buts about it. That's just the way it was. And Mother would wash and bleach out flour sacks, sugar sacks, and she'd make tablecloths out of them. And we had to have table manners. And when we sat at the table, there was no shenanigans. We visited and talked, but we behaved ourselves. But this one time, I don't know just what got into one of the twins, but Daddy was sitting at the head of the table, and he had his coffee cup sitting here. And all of a sudden, a piece of dill pickle just went flying. Do you remember that, Violet? And heaven help us, it landed in Daddy's coffee cup. And Daddy just kept right on eating, and his looks could just shrivel you down to about that size. Couldn't they, Violet? He could just, he kept right on eating a couple bites, and then he kind of glanced over at Mother, and he said, "It seems to me like a man could eat his supper without getting a goddamn dill pickle in his coffee." And then another time, one of the twins threw a biscuit.
You did.
Well, was I the one? Now, honey, I couldn't remember. I remember the biscuit. I remember the biscuit flying through the air. And didn't it hit Daddy on the nose?
On the nose.
Yeah, on the nose. And that's how I remember his look.
Yeah.
He never said a word. He just
That
looked
was
at me.
his baby girl that did that.
Oh, God, I can still see that look. I'm telling you, he would have been an expert in a war, you know. Teach information warfare on how to look at a prisoner and get information out of him. My dad was an expert at that. And I remember the biscuit and Bill Pickle. The twins would climb on cliffs. And I was a coward. The last time I can ever remember climbing on a cliff was across from, up there, across the creek from the new barn. And I climbed up on those cliffs and got stuck up there.
Yeah.
And Mother blew the whistle for me and couldn't find me. And I guess I screamed or something, and she looked across and she saw my little dress flapping in the breeze. And there I was, clear up on those cliffs, and I froze up there. I couldn't go up, I couldn't go down. And she had to send the other kids up to get me. And I think that's the last time I ever climbed anything that I knew I couldn't get out of, other than on the farm where I worked, and I had to get up in the big elevator one time, and I told my boss, if you ever ask me to do that again, I'll walk off this farm and never come back. So they didn't. Let's see. I was staying with Jim and Muriel, and Bill wasn't school age. I think I might have been in the first or second grade. I'm not sure. But Bill, you remember Muriel, tell him about this. And Muriel and I talked about it a lot after I got grown. I took off one day and walked down to the funk place. Remember that story?
Yeah, she's got it in her book.
Oh, yeah. Anyway, you know, her and Jimmy should have beaten me to death. And I didn't know why I did that. Muriel told me, as we discussed it years after that, you know, that I knew that, I think it was Alan and the twins, or Chuck and the twins, was going to ride up from Saddle Creek, and I knew about it, and I went down to meet him. I remember being so lonesome for the twins, terribly lonesome. But I don't remember it tying in with me taking off and going. All I remember is I just started wandering like I always did. And I just wandered farther and farther, and oh gee, I'm almost at the funk place, you know. I'll see if I can find something to eat. All there was in the cupboards was a box of brown sugar. Oh yeah, that was great. I ate every bit of it. And because I was always hungry for sweets. Well, it started getting late, so I started walking up the trail, and sure enough, it was getting just about dusk, and here they came. And they picked me up, and of course, they were flabbergasted. Here was this bratty girl halfway down the mountain, you know, where she shouldn't have been. And by that time, I was so tired and exhausted, all I remember is them carrying on about, what are you doing here? Them picking me up and putting me on behind one of the saddles, and then riding on up to Hat Point. And I can't even remember the top of that tower one time because I was so terrified of heights. And but I do remember being tied to that damn porch all day. That was horrible.
And Mom said in her book she was pretty crestfallen.
Huh?
Mom said in her book you were pretty crestfallen.
Oh, I was. That was horrible. And now up at one of the corrals, up above the Saddle Creek, I think it was the last alfalfa field up there, there was a cave back there, remember? Wasn't there a corral there too, Violet?
Yeah.
And there was a cave back there. And Dad and Mother always told Chuck and the twins and I, don't ever go in that cave, because the Forest Service left some dynamite boxes in there, boxes of dynamite. And when they got them out, they didn't
Dad
take...
owned part of it.
Huh?
Dad owned part of it.
Oh, did he? Well, anyway, I didn't know who owned them, but anyway, when they took it out of there, they lost a bunch of dynamite caps in there. And if you mess with them, you're just going to get blown to pieces. And I don't know whether it was true or not, but we just didn't get anywhere near that cave.
Oh, no.
Oh, that just had me terrified. For years, all the rest of the years I lived in there, you know, the twins and all of us stayed away from that silly little cave. And I always wondered later, I was going to ask you or Chuck about it, or Marjorie, or Jimmy, and I always forgot if there was something about that cave they just wanted us to stay away from, or if there actually was dynamite.
That was a dynamite cave.
Well, I wasn't sure.
Always.
I wasn't sure. And I was fascinated watching my daddy workhorses. There was something about it that I just loved. But there was very strict rules about watching Daddy or Jimmy or Alan or any of them when they was working a horse in a corral, trying to break a horse or saddling a horse or anything like that. Us little kids did not get around underfoot. We stayed way back. We did not make any sudden moves. And I got to be such an expert at sneaking up to the corral, crawling up very slowly till I could get up on the top pole of the corrals and sit there and for hours and not move a muscle watching my dad work horses. And you didn't dare move, because if you made a movement, you know you could spook that horse and get it killed. And I just was so fascinated. Well, up at the one of the cow camps, you went from the main cabin down around the timber, quite a wide trail, and there was a corral there. That's where we kept the milk cow over there. The twins and Chuck would sneak over there, and that's when they get the horses in, and they'd leave the colts in that corral. And this was a no-no. They were not supposed to ride those colts, but they would when they thought nobody was going to catch them, you know. And I'd crawl up on the top rail of the corral, and I want to ride, I want to ride, I want to ride, just drive them crazy. Well, they would be having fun. Well, one time I went too far, and one of them said, okay, we'll just let you ride a colt. They got hold of the colt. They set me on that colt. And God help them, they opened the corral gate. And that colt just went like a jet out of that corral, around that timber, and I was just hanging on by the mane, screaming like a maniac. I can still see my mother coming out of that cabin and standing there, and how big her eyes were. And I don't remember who run that colt down and who got hold of me. But I'll tell you, Chuck and the twins were in so much trouble the rest of that summer. It was horrible. They pretty much lost their lives over that. And I could just see every step of it. It was quite an experience. And another thing, the twins and Chuck, most of the time, if Dad didn't have them doing something else, they had to go milk the cow. You had that blooming calf to hassle with. Well, I just thought it would be the greatest thing in the world to learn to milk that cow. So I named it, let me milk the cow, let me milk the cow. Okay, finally I got big enough I could milk that cow. Oh, heaven forbid. I would go and I'd wrestle that blooming calf around, and I would get that cow milked, and I was so little, and the milk pail would be full, and that wire bail would cut into my hands, and I had to walk around this trail through the timber. Well, lots of times, about the time I'd start walking around, that would be when they would bring the horses in from wrangling. Here they would come tearing down. I would have to get my milk, take my milk pail, get way off in the timbers so I wouldn't spook the horses, and wait there, and wait till all the dust settled, and then pack that heavy pail of milk. And I can remember thinking to myself, why did I want to do this? Why did I want to do this? That calf knocked me down. I'm dirty, I'm hot, I'm hungry. Why did I want to do this? And I can still remember myself thinking, why did I want to do this? And it's just as clear in my mind as it was yesterday. And the twins were just delighted. They just sit and grin at me. You're going to have the cow this morning, aren't you? Now it happened. When Muriel came down there to teach, the twins and I were used to, of course, like all of the other kids, until they got old enough to put more time in work and had to get up and, help with the chores. And the twins and I, you know, we were used to getting out and rambling everywhere and playing. Well, Muriel took over the entertaining us little kids one day because there was something that the family had to do, and someone had to look out after the twins and I. So she made beanbags, and she walked us up the trail, looking down the river, She walked us up across the flat and then up around the point there. And there was a big rock there, and I can still see Mario sitting on that big rock. Now, you sit over here, you sit over here, you sit over here, and we're going to toss beanbags. The twins and I were so bored. So bored, just tossing a beanbag, you know. I can still remember how bored we are. And Mario couldn't understand why we didn't like that. And we were just plain bored. And so that big project fell through. She finally just gave up on us and let us go play our own rough water and play. But like Chuck and I think Violet both mentioned, the two big no-nos, and they preached it to us before we were old enough to hardly be toddling. Don't walk through any tall grass without a stick in your hand. Looking for rattlesnakes. Do not go near the river. And there was an inner sense Mother and Dad instilled in all of us. And I think if I could talk to the older ones and about this subject, they would say the same thing. Mother and Dad instilled in all of us an inner warning button. This is dangerous. Don't do this. You sensed it before you started to do it. This is a no-no. We skirted it mighty close sometimes. But the river, you didn't go near the river. We played in the creek. You didn't go near the river. And always, you listened for a rattlesnake, and I hated cheatgrass because I always thought it sounded like a rattlesnake. And you listened for the rattle of a rattlesnake, and you never walked through tall grass or bushes without that stick in your hand, going like this, you know, and it got to be kind of a toy with us. We always walked around with that. I think I'm just about done, folks, and I love to talk. Anyway, I have Ace and the Twins. Oh boy, up in the Seven Devils. What the Ace and the Twins and Chuck couldn't think of. It was, they played in the ponds, they made rafts, and of course I tagged along. I just drove them crazy. And those ponds up there, they had leeches, but they didn't hurt anybody. But you know, they told me these crazy stories about Kappy. You don't want to get on these rafts for anything, because if you fall off, these leeches are like that. And they'll just suck all the blood right out of your body. I am telling you, they would tell these stories. They would just elaborate on these stories. They had me so scared of water. I would go up around those lakes by myself, and no way would I stick a toe in that water, even in the lakes, and there wasn't a leech in the lakes. But I would not get near water because I knew one of those big old leeches was just going to drain me dry. Oh, gosh, they were on me. And the Twins and AC would get in fights, and every time they all got in a squabble, maybe it was two would pair up. AC pair up with Dawn, they'd pick on Dan. AC pair up with Dan, they'd pick on Dawn. Dan and Dawn would pair up on AC, and they'd pick on Dan. And they read these books about the knights of old, so they'd make these long lances, you know, and they'd fight with them. And they would jab at each other. It's a wonder they didn't kill each other or run them through their stomach or something. They got Dawn and AC paired up against Dan. And I remember they got him back in this cave, and they had these great long poles sharpened on the end, and they were jabbing at him in there. And this is terrible to say, but Dan was just a little extra spatial. Just a little bit extra spatial in my eyes for some reason. I don't know why. And I wandered by and saw Dawn and AC with these long poles. We're going to get you, you know, we're going to run you through. And Dan was backed up in this cave, and I just got hysterical. I remember just getting hysterical. I screamed and I yelled at him, "You're not going to hurt my dad." And you know, they were so shocked and so surprised at my reaction, and they were just playing. But I can still remember the awful looks on their faces. Well, we're not going to hurt him. We're not going to hurt him, Kappy. We're not going to hurt him. But I thought they were, and I would have killed them both. I think I pretty much wound up, but this inner warning, Mother and Dad built into all of us I think I wish it could have protected Daddy, so we'd have had him longer. I wish so many of us hadn't ended up with heart trouble. And I'm so grateful for having the family I had and knowing the people that I have known. And I think that inner warning signal got Chuck through several wars and got the twins through some wars. And I think we were a pretty nice family. We all of us have worked very hard. And I will say this about my family. When things went kind of bad with Mom and Dad, and the twins and I were, and Chuck, was kind of little lost souls. Chuck was old enough, he started pretty much taking care of himself and working, and the twins and I weren't quite old enough, but Jimmy and Alan and Marjorie and Violet, there was never a question of us going to a foster home. We'll take care of it. One school year, I went to 7 different schools in the 8th grade, or else it was 8 different schools in the 7th grade. But one of the family would take care of us, and if circumstances come along, they couldn't keep us, one of the other family was there. And these people were raising babies of their own. And this was hard years. There was many times they had very little food on the table. Our clothes were made out of hand-me-downs many times. Marjorie and Violet and Muriel, Hazel didn't so much, but Marjorie and Violet and Muriel would tear them apart, wash them, cut them out, and make the twin shirts, make me little dresses. And they were just like brand new. We loved them. And my sisters and my sister-in-laws did this for me and for the twins. And God bless them. I'm so glad I've had them. I miss the ones that are gone. And I love my nieces and nephews. I think they are absolutely the most fabulous people in the world. I am so proud of all of them and of my children and of my great nieces and nephews. I think this family is just very, very special. All of you. Thank you.
Can you tell one last one, Kappy? Can you tell one last story? The one about the twins on the mean mule with the two saddles? You gotta tell that.
I'm
That's,
sorry, I had that written down here and I forgot. I'll tell that
And
real
I
quick.
have one more little
Now,
story too.
okay.
This is another story. I don't know if I remember this or if it's just remembering Mother telling about this. Daddy had an old mule up at the front place, and it was a mean son of a gun. Violet probably remembers it. I don't remember which one it was. But he couldn't do anything with it, and that was something for Daddy. And I think he was getting ready to sell it or kill it or something. He had gotten the twins, these little saddles that weren't any longer than that. And I hated them because they had these little saddles and I didn't. But anyway, he couldn't do a thing with this mule, and he told his kids, don't you get around this mule. He is mean, very mean. And the twins disappeared one day. The saddles were up in the saddle house or the barn or someplace. And Mother went out and she heard one of the twins yelling or something. And behind the house in the funk place was this big ridge come down this way. And Mother glanced up. She stepped out from the porch and she said she glanced up, and in the silhouette of this big old mule up there on this ridge, the twins had taken that mule, and you couldn't get a cinch under this mule from what Mother had told me. You just couldn't get a cinch. It would just go nuts. The twins had gotten this mule and got it up against a fence or something, and they had put one saddle clear up on its front part.
Withers.
Yeah, the withers. I kept thinking flanks, and I knew that wasn't it. And then put the other saddle right behind it, cinched it under the flanks and right behind the front legs. And then they both got on. And they rode that, they was riding that mule right down that ridge. And Mother looked up and there was a silhouette of those two white heads sitting on that mule. And Daddy was in the house. And she yelled at him. She says, Pete, come out here and look at your boys. I'm just about done, honey. Pete, come out here and look at your boys. And Daddy stepped out on the porch, and Mother was standing there laughing. And she said, I don't remember this, but I remember Mother telling me about it. Daddy looked up there, and he saw them. All he could see was this mean mule. And his two precious boys sitting on that mule. And Mother standing there laughing, and Mother said he was just so upset. And all he could think of was, I got to take this anger out on somebody. He turned around and he says, God damn it, Ethel, he says, if that mule was dragging those boys to death, you'd stand here and laugh. But somehow they got those twins off of that mule. And Mother talked about that for years and years. Do you remember that happening, Violet? Well, anyway, the only other story, and I'm going to talk about it real quick. I used to get a cold, and I'd pack saddles on it, and I'd go down to the dump over the bank, and I'd pour those pack saddles full of tin cans and bottles and stuff, and then I'd go camping out through the timber. Dad was shoeing horses, and I took my colt out, and that colt got mad at me, and it was lodgepole timber, and it got mad at me, and it decided it had enough of that, and it turned around, and it bit me on the butt, and I started running because I knew that colt was going to just bite me all the way back. I was screaming. Every time the colt would jump over one of those logs behind me, I knew the colt was going to bite me again. And here was all these cans and bottles rattling. My dad pretty near killed me. And it was one of those things I will never, ever, ever forget. And I think I'm through. The only thing I can remember, the thing that I loved the most about Snake River was my family's love. My mother and my dad, and my brothers and my sisters. My sister-in-laws, my brother-in-laws, the family's love. And the thing I hated most about Snake River was riding up and down those damn mountains. Big Lord. Okay.
I have one more story to tell.
I claim myself as being a pastor, if you can believe it. Once in a while we get coffee together. I heard you were having a family reunion, and I just really wanted to drop by because I've been with you in other things. And I want to tell you that I really feel like this is a special family. That's one thing. I know you want to eat. Listen. If you ever come to church, don't you tell me I'm long-winded.
I'm sorry. I'm really sorry.
I have always, from the first time that I met Chuck and Nell, always had the feeling I never had, some people you got to walk around on eggshells and kind of pussyfoot around them and worry about whether you're going to hurt their feelings or anything. I've always felt very comfortable with Chuck and Nell and just down-to-earth people. One thing that I wasn't comfortable with him, though, is when he found out I was a Marine, and I found out what rank he was. But that vanished pretty quick, too. And I want to say thank you for letting me be a part of your family, Chuck and Nell. And God bless you.
Thank you.
See ya. Me. My older brothers and sister had made me very afraid of the dark. And even in the house with the old lamp sitting on the table, it created great shadows on the walls, and they'd make with their fingers. And Violet, there's a coyote behind you. I'd been sickly when I was 9 years old and very sick. Anyhow, but I'm deathly afraid of the dark. When Charlie didn't go get that wood box, so we'd have to light the lantern to go out in that dark, out in the woods there, and get that wood packed in. So we did. And he said once, I've told you for the last time. And there was a bear had killed a cow over toward Lookout Mountain near Springs there. So Dad built a little log trail around her with a little gate and put a bear trap in that gate because he knew the bear would come back and eat on the carcass. Once the bear started killing the cattle, they didn't quit. So they went that day and he caught a bear. So he shot it, jerked it down a ways and reset the trap. While he was doing that, he heard a little noise, looked up in the tree, and there was a little cub. So small that Dad knew it couldn't live by itself, so he had to shoot it. But it was so cute. They thought he'd bring it home to show us kids. And he got home after dark with that little bear on the pack horse. And he saw that the wood he had chopped before he left early that morning was still piled around the chopping block. And so he unsaddled and turned the animals loose. And pretty soon he came in the house. Mother had his supper fixed, and he's sitting there telling her about things that was happening. And he looked at the wood box and he said, "The last time, go get that wood." We lit our lantern. It was the dark of the moon. And Charlie and I went out to the chopping block to get that wood. And I set the lantern down, and we both squatted down on each side, started loading our arms with wood. Suddenly, I looked right up. I'm down on my, squatted down. And right in front of me, there sat a bear looking me eye to eye. And I threw the wood in every direction, knocked the lantern off, went screaming to the house, chucked right after me, screaming too. I knew that bear was right behind us, and I clung Mother's frame. Save me, you know. And Dad is sitting there laughing fits of us. And what had happened, when he saw that, he moved the chopped wood out, set that little bear up against the chopping block, and braced one little piece of wood under his chin. And there it sat. Do you know, never ever did they have to tell us again to get the wood in. And even after I lived in Salem, and I had a wood stove in my home there, and I'd get wood, I caught myself once glancing out and I thought, well, it's almost dark, I better go get the wood in. But that's the way they control